Speaking of money and getting money in corrupt ways,
Yeah.
the inside the Trump administration that is to be, there's a lot of jockeying for positions for cabinet posts and et cetera. And the latest breaking news is that they, within their own administration, again, administration to be, as he is president elect, they're looking into this Boris Ashton and the fact that he actually positioned himself between the president and those who wanted to gain access to the president for
Yeah.
various cabinet positions and also to lobby for other reasons. And he actually was charging, it is suggested, based on these allegations, charging people money. I mean, $30,000 was the money I saw. This was $10,000 a month, et cetera. It varied for access to the president, again, president-elect, and for essentially representing that person to the president in a positive light. Can you speak to that?
Right. Yes, and according to some of the news reports, J.D. Vance ran a sting on Boris Epshteyn to nail him for this, and apparently has him cold. And given the outsized influence that Boris Epshteyn has had on Trump's actions and decision making, I'm not surprised the long knives are out among other people in the Trump circle who want to pare him back for their own benefit. My goodness, the idea that people who work in or around a White House are jockeying for position and undercutting other people, shocking, absolutely shocking.
That's what I said in the first hour. It's pretty
And,
much
and
Washington, 101.
and setting yourself up to get paid because you've got access to a president is not new, but it's usually not done in this blunt, utterly corrupt fashion. It's done in a more subtle fashion. Why don't you become a client of my lobbying firm? And I play golf with the president every other Saturday, and I'll talk you up in the clubhouse or on the tee on the ninth hole. Epstein apparently was just very heavy-handed about this. But what you're beginning to see is these different forces around Trump contending for one another. Now, interestingly, when Joe Biden was president, there were almost no leaks out of that White House negative to him because people were incredibly loyal to him. They thought he was a good, decent man. During the Trump administration, the first time, there were lots of leaks. Loyalty with Donald is entirely a one-way street. And if you're trying to push your position, you may find out that Donald will just squash you because it's all about Donald. It's not about the good of the country. It's not about, the people who believe that Donald Trump is the champion of the working guy. They are major characters in his fictional world in which he creates his own reality. This is a man who campaigned in 2016 saying wages are too high. He is opposed to the state and local minimum wages that have been raised in some places to as much as, I think, $19 or $20. A lot of places, 15 or 16. He hates unions. What did Pope Francis say 10 years ago? Without unions, there cannot be economic justice. And when did wages of American workers stop growing for the vast majority and flatten out and some years decline compared to 1973? When we started going after unions. Most workers are commodities. Whether you're a police detective, that's a pretty skilled job, or a secretary, or a newspaper reporter, almost all people in jobs are commodities. They can be replaced by somebody else. There are some people who have either an audience or talent, and they make enormous amounts of money. The TV cable hosts that you see, even though their audiences are only 1 to 3 million people, some of those folks make $3 million a month. When Keith Olbermann was on what became the Al Jazeera channel, it was called Current TV. It was owned by Al Gore and his friend Joel Hyatt. He was making, the story was around town, $15 million a year because he was their star person to draw an audience. When the Comcast family, the Roberts family of Philadelphia, bought NBC Universal and acquired Comcast, I said right then, Keith Olbermann will be gone before the deal closes. It's not possible that the Roberts family, who are very right, will keep him, even though he brings an audience. And sure enough, Keith got called in and told, we owe you, and the story at the time was somewhere around $30 million left on your contract. Here's a check for payment in full. Goodbye. The money that people make in these positions is just off the chart. I once wrote a proposal for a movie about Steve Wynn, the very impressive Las Vegas gambling impresario, and Donald Trump and their rivalry. It took a weekend. I got paid for writing this proposal that took one weekend, 7 months of my New York Times salary. So when you get into this world of the TV where he's drawing people, hosts from Fox News, the money is just unbelievably off the chart. Now, the people you see doing the afternoon shows, they make good money, maybe $200,000 to $500,000 a year, something like that, maybe more, depending on their draw. But that's not what ordinary people make. And this is who Donald identifies with. And so then who does he pick for cabinet posts? So he's picked a doctor from an unaccredited Caribbean medical school for one of the top medical jobs. He's picked Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has no qualifications to do anything, and has these crazy ideas that vaccines are harmful. And by the way, the measles lobby is applauding. Measles, polio, whooping cough, pertussis, your and my parents and grandparents were scared to death of these diseases because they knew people all around them who died, and they didn't want their own children to die. But vaccines, no, that's not why those diseases are almost never heard of. Those are harmful. There's going to be a huge price to pay for this. He did make one. Oh, and then he put the snake oil salesman Mehmet Oz in charge of Medicare and Medicaid. The one appointment he's made that looks like it might be useful is a Dr. Marty, I think it's pronounced Macron, a physician who has some outside the box ideas and appears to be a serious person. And if he is confirmed, as I would expect, he holds out the hope of some interesting ideas. And we should always be open to new ideas. We should be cautious about them because new things often don't work out as we intended. The law of unintended consequences. Solving a problem creates new problems. But this is a guy who appears to have some interesting ideas that we really should debate. We shouldn't be stodgy and say, well, that's the way we've always done it, therefore we must continue to do it. That's ridiculous.
And so his new ideas, David, just to follow up on that, and I know he's, the cake isn't baked on him yet, but can you speak to what intrigued you?
He thinks that we inadequately diagnose people, which I think almost every physician I know has complained that we rely too much on medical tests and on expensive technology when careful questioning of people and some simple tests. I had to go see a surgeon once about a back injury that I suffered more than 50 years ago. And I walked in with my MRI images, and he said, oh, we don't need to look at those, and proceeded to diagnose me in about 20 minutes, and then said, all right, here's what the films are going to show. And it was exactly what they showed. And I said, how'd you do that? And he said, long before we had this technology, we figured out how to figure out what's going on inside your body. He thinks that our financing mechanisms need some review. I'm a big advocate of that, and I have been for a long time. I think employing tens of thousands of people as clerks to process, your medical claim, and then you have to go fight with them over $10.06 is wasteful, inefficient. It's feather bedding in the old railroad industry term for jobs that you don't need. They're make work jobs. So he has some interesting ideas. And by the way, Donald, before he became a Republican of convenience, Donald told me very clearly, and we discussed it more than once, that, as he put it, healthcare should be like the roads. When you need to use them, you just use them. You don't pay. And if you want something extra, you pay for that, i.e. toll roads, where you don't have to have big trucks if you're on the Garden State Parkway in New Jersey, or you can go more quickly. But that's what other countries do. If we had the French healthcare system, the best in the world by every study I've read, and I've read a half a dozen of them, you get seen sooner and faster by excellent doctors. The health status of French people is better than that of Americans. Even if you just do white Americans, it's better. And in France, you don't pay out of pocket with very small exceptions. Nobody loses their home. Nobody goes bankrupt because of health care bills in France. And if we had their system, it would save an amount of money equal to all the income taxes paid by everybody who makes less than $600,000 a year.
Wow.
So all else being equal, and it never is, but all else being equal, if we had the French healthcare system, we'd get better care, we'd get seen faster, our health status would improve, and you wouldn't pay income taxes till you made $600,000.
And that's just crazy. I mean,
but even if it's only $100,000 would be the threshold for paying taxes, it would make an enormous difference in American life. But socialism.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's there are so many special interests. And as I come to you from Washington, D.C. today, I mean, we're a heartbeat from all of them, even from where I sit. And one of the special interests, and it's huge, is the nation's insurance companies, and the healthcare world is filled with a really terrifically effective lobbying mechanism that occurs here in Washington, along with the military-industrial complex and all them, the ones that are sort of spoken of frequently. I want to get to the Trump because you mentioned the cabinet, some of the other picks. He talked about. And they realized that Project 2025 was this radioactive kind of thing. Don't mention it on the campaign trail. He said he didn't even know what it was, et cetera. And then, of course, he's populated his cabinet nominees with tons of these Project 2025 people, right? I mean, Russell Vought, and I know this, and you do too, David. I mean, the Office of Management and Budget may sound like one of those things that it really just doesn't know, whatever, I guess that's a guy who just signs off on a bunch of checks. But they actually are extremely powerful. And this guy Vought, who comes out of Project 2025, he's going to run OMB again. He ran it during the Trump administration the first time. And I wonder, he's a true believer. I mean, he really is. And I'm wondering if you can speak for a moment about both him and more broadly sort of the true believer Project 2025 guys who are, and they're mostly literally guys, who are going to be taking over in this next term.
Well, so Trump during the campaign, said, total contradiction. I never heard of it. I don't want to know what it is. I'm not interested. And then on another day, he would say, well, parts of it I like and parts of it I don't. Those two things are completely incompatible. When the project was launched, he blessed it. There's videotape of him blessing it and saying, these are my people and this will be my administration's plan. But, Donald lies. That's not news. OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, wields tremendous power. My late sister-in-law worked there in the Nixon administration. She was a very conservative Republican before she became a diplomat. And she would talk at dinner about, man, we really went after those bureaucrats in this office. And we said, you're not going to do that. They wield enormous influence and power. And there used to be a project it lost its funding eventually, but for years there was a small nonprofit in Washington, D.C. that I wrote about from time to time that was the watchdog for OMB. And they would issue, directives and orders, and this outfit would tell you about them. And you could see back then how it wielded power. When Nixon was president, he refused to spend money Congress had appropriated. Now, let's remember, under our Constitution, the president is effectively subordinate to Congress. Article 1 of our Constitution is Congress, and it has the power of the purse, the power to tax, etc. And Article 2, Donald says, I have an Article 2 so I can do anything I want. That's not what it says. What it says is you're the commander-in-chief of the military, and you will carry out the orders of Congress. Your job is to execute, that's why we call you the executive, to execute what Congress wants. And Trump has made it very clear that if he thinks we shouldn't spend money somewhere, he's going to cut off the faucet. Well, there's a 1974 law passed in response to Nixon called the Impoundment Act that a president can't do that. If Congress has said you're to spend money on this, you're supposed to spend the money. There's going to be a huge fight over that because Trump is going to refuse to pay bills. And OMB will be central to this. But even if they were to lose that, they can slow walk money. They can find reasons to say this contract is invalid. I was talking to some of my fellow faculty members and then on the phone with some people who are real academics, unlike me, lifelong academics at other schools. And they are all expecting that unless you are a right-wing school like Tiny Hillsdale College in Michigan, or George Mason, the libertarian university just outside DC, that there's going to be holdbacks on research projects of all kinds. And here's why that's really important. More than half the growth in our economy since World War II is due to taxpayer investments in science. This is a well-studied field. The only arguments are, well, is it 58% or 64%? I mean, they're tiny arguments on the margin. It is investments by American taxpayers in science, hiring companies in many cases to do the work, hiring Oracle, which was created to help the CIA have a database, and now is incredibly important to how we work. Developing neodymium powders and metals for things like smart bombs and iPhones and the like. These are from taxpayer investments. Balzac wrote in his most famous novel that behind every great fortune lies a great crime. Not true in America today, but what is true is behind almost every great fortune are government subsidies and favors. And it's just central to them.
Ain't that true, David? To the point that I even think in some of the research that you're talking about in research funding, where the spigot is going to be turned off or opened up, these are ultimately special interests if they can grab Trump's ear long enough. The problem is that the people who've had Trump's ear, it would seem to me, I guess I'm asking you, and who've had it for a very long time, are the Project 2025 people. So you're kind of really riding with that strategy.
Yeah. So Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, if I said that right,
Close enough.
in their made up role at the Department of Government Efficiency, which is just going to be an advisory group. Think about the power that they're going to have. Elon Musk has $13 billion in government contracts. His fortune is heavily tied to government money. Boeing competes with him in some of his businesses, his space business. You think he's not going to find inefficiency in Boeing's connections with the government, but not in his own? Let's live in the real world here. The things they're proposing to do are going to allow them to punish their enemies and take care of their friends. So if you like people at a school in Texas, you can steer government money there. And if you don't like the folks at Harvard or Yale, you can pull money away from them. And we've never had this. We've had professional government. Is it perfectly efficient? Of course not. Frankly, I don't want to live in a country that's perfectly efficient. Think about it. Do you really want the government to be able to efficiently do whatever it wants, like rounding people up? Inefficiency has some.
You've gone to the worst example first.
Sure. But when the commissars wanted to seize all the guns in Poland, they didn't have any trouble doing so because everybody's guns were registered. And if you didn't live on a farm where you need the gun because you might have foxes or wolves or whatever, they could seize your guns right away because they knew who you were. And so I would hope the Second Amendment crowd would think about that. Keep in mind the way that all these claims, Obama's going to take your guns, Biden's going to take your guns, nobody took your guns.
Yeah, there's a sense of the boogeyman coming that they really have sold so effectively, and sort of the left is the boogeyman, and it's just remarkable how people have, I think, in large measure, unwittingly, signed on to an administration that will hurt many of their interests. I mean, when you look at those, I look at those rallies, and I just see older people, probably requiring or wanting government assistance on some level, Medicare related or whatever it might be. And I see how this administration is committed to rolling back all of these different programs that are there to help this very constituency. It is just a sign of how broken the political system is that Trump was able to gain so much in the way of popularity. It wasn't just a question of them reluctantly voting for Trump. They anxiously voted for Donald Trump,
right.
David?
Right. And I think that one of the shocks that people are going to get is they haven't decided what to do yet. But the signals that are being put out by the Trump people are that they're just going to repeal the Affordable Care Act. If you do that, 30 million people will no longer have health insurance. And the health insurance for most of them isn't very good. The reimbursement rates are low. Doctors don't want to take you. You go to the end of the line or you get low quality doctors. But consider my 54-year-old oldest son who's had quadruple bypass surgery. No insurance company will take him on as an individual, and he's a small businessman. So he would be utterly without health insurance. That doesn't mean that he won't get some kind of care. By law, you have to be treated in an emergency room, but chronic heart disease is not something you treat in an emergency room. It's just a very expensive way to patch you up for the moment. If he were to become totally disabled because he isn't getting medical care, now he goes on to the costs of the taxpayers. There is no avoiding the costs of a humane society. And they're certainly not going to say, well, the solution to this is we'll just kill these people. Remember Alan Grayson, the congressman from Florida, the very abrasive congressman, once said the Republican health care plan is simple to understand. If you get sick and aren't wealthy, die soon. And he was sanctioned for that, but I think he was generally in the right ballpark there. And so there are going to be lots of negative economic consequences of the incoming administration to the extent that they walk their talk. Now, the last time around, Donald didn't have people around him to do this, and he is an incompetent manager, so he couldn't do it himself. This time, he's got a lot of people who are competent managers and true believers. And, disruption per se is not a bad thing. Joseph Schumpeter, the great economist, talked about creative destruction. That's how you get economic advances. But that's not what they're proposing. They're proposing to change the economy of the country at the expense of children, the disabled, the elderly, and the sick. In other words, the people who can't fight back.
There's only one through line on these cabinet positions that I can find. There's no sort of philosophical underpinning about anything with Trump. I mean, you got, RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth and, these people who are, at least in the early going, I was sort of figuring, if they come across well on TV and they kind of look good, I mean, cosmetically, Trump is drawn to them and he wants them to rep his administration. And basically, it's like a casting call in Hollywood that way. But at least in Hollywood, they make you actually, read the lines and figure out whether you're any good in the show. But what I'm getting at is perhaps the most disturbing. It's hard because I think there are a lot of disturbing appointments here potentially. But the Hegseth appointment will likely get pushed back, particularly if there is an FBI background check. And I wonder, David, again, to review, tell me if you feel he could really get away with just big timing and bigfooting the FBI background check the way he has done now. I mean, there's a lot of dark money that's funding this transition. He's not taking government money, and he's saying, screw you with the background checks.
So any incoming administration is supposed to sign a bunch of contracts, and then they get a lot of money appropriated by Congress. They get office space, telephones, computers, a budget for travel, and Trump is refusing to do that. Money donated to the transition and to the inauguration is supposed to be public. In my last Trump book, The Big Cheat, I tell how Stephanie Wolkoff, who used to be Melania's best friend, was asked to take millions of dollars off the books. Clearly, she believes from the context from Russians. So they didn't have to report what would be illegal gifts. Foreigners can't give to these things. And, she had enough sense to say, no, I'm not going to have anything to do with that. And one of the questions I raise is, how brazen are these folks? Because 10 minutes on the phone with her, I knew she wasn't somebody who just looks the other way. She's a sophisticated woman who knows how to look out for herself. They're refusing to sign all these documents. They're refusing to have FBI background checks of people. Tulsi Gabbard is particularly troublesome. Sebastian Gorka, who was supposed to debate me once on British radio and just screamed and yelled and wouldn't let me get a word in, he is a absolutely through and through fascist. He wore his fascist uniform to the Trump inauguration.
That's right. He wore the medal, which is fascism, is what David's talking about. Yeah. That's absolutely true.
And so if you don't do background checks on these people, you don't know what else they have done. If you bury background checks the way they did with Brett Kavanaugh, 4,000 tips came in on Brett Kavanaugh, and none of them were investigated. They were all turned over to the White House, including ones from women who apparently clearly claimed, he raped me, not coerced me uncomfortably. He flat out raped me. All that was buried. One of the things that will follow if Hegseth, who says, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry, he took a woman who says she felt she'd been drugged with something like Repanol or some kind of date rape drug to her room, took her phone away, blocked her exit from the room, had sex with her, not rape. That tells you a lot about his mindset. But apparently there's a second woman who has a similar complaint and tells me there are probably others, because things like this are rarely one-offs. They are patterns of behavior. So if Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard get these very high-level positions with access to intelligence, I think the Five Eyes program will radically change. The U.S., Canada, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Australia have a very intense intelligence sharing operation. The US, the UK, and the Australians in particular have massive investments in capturing what's called SIGNET, signals intelligence. Every overseas phone call they capture, even though they don't listen to most of them, but when they need something, they can find it. The Australians aren't going to share with us. The British aren't going to share with us sensitive materials if these people are in the White House, especially given Gabbard openly spreading Kremlin propaganda. John Bolton, whatever you think of John Bolton, and I've interviewed him, I don't see the world the way he does it all, but I respect that he is a serious person who understands world geopolitical affairs on a very sophisticated level. John Bolton says Sebastian Gorka, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, they have no business having any job in the government. He's a rock rib, solid conservative. And they're not listening to him because this administration doesn't have anything to do with being conservative or liberal. It has to do with Donald being America's first dictator. And this is a terrible thing to be able to just thumb your nose at Congress's requirement. You sign a contract, you run FBI background checks on people.
It's a basic ethics agreement. I mean, it's alarming just on the surface when you see him push back against that. It's like, what could possibly be disturbing to you, sir, about signing a basic ethics agreement?
And then the national security implications of this are just absolutely god awful. And I'm somebody who's literally exposed spies and foreign agents. Okay, I counseled a journalist who's working on a story the other day. You want law enforcement and the government to have an intelligence function. You don't want to live in San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York City without a police intelligence function. But then you have to control it so that they don't do things like LA, where they had undercover officers in Moscow and Havana, and the police chief assigned at least 8 officers to have sex with women just so they would give them information between the sheets. You have to control it and make sure they're actually working on crimes, not on falderall and other stuff. Well, Donald Trump has no concept of that. He has no concept of intelligence. He didn't take his briefings a lot. He doesn't know anything about the world, but he responds to flattery. And I think sooner or later, we're going to have something happen that hopefully will wake the people who support Trump up to realize this man has no respect for the national security needs of our country.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope so. I mean, we've heard, look, he met with the Russians with only the translator present, and everybody else on staff was excused.
And then alone.
Right, that's right, alone with only their translator. That's exactly right. I mean, it's and then tearing up the notes, and I mean, there's so many. I just don't know what people need to get a cold slap in the face on this stuff. But on the way out,
Mark, why would most people? Mark, why would most people understand that the same way that a lot of people think from his TV show that he's a business genius? What do they know about how a board of directors works, about management theory? I used to teach at a graduate business school, okay, and was a business reporter. Why would they know that? Why, they wouldn't. So that's not surprising. The Democrats, I would argue, have done a very poor job of trying to message to people, understand this is why these things matter and you need to pay attention to them. And you would think conservatives particularly would be deeply concerned about national security matters, about Donald. We know Donald has given away national secrets. It is indisputable that he's done so. How many and how deeply, we don't know. We just know about a handful. And people should be worried about that.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.